Derivatives trading involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results.
Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, June 18th, 2024. My name is John Pieranunzi, and this is the opening swing. Let's begin today, as we always do, with our news. Out of Europe, Europe is up about 0.5%. We had the zoo economic sentiment out of the Euro area and Germany. This is, I've always considered it to be the most significant European number, and they both came out a little bit better than expected. Europe is up about 0.5%, as I've said. That's we have out of Europe. Coming into our U.S. hours, our 8:30 news driver is retail sales, followed up with industrial production at 9:15, one of those numbers that come out at a weird time, 9:15. At 10 o'clock, we have business inventories, and we also have Barkin speaking at 10. There's a few announcements out of Treasury land, and then at 11:40, we also have Collins speaking, Musalem at 1 p.m., as well as Logan at 1 p.m., and a 20-year bond auction, which I would be aware of. 2 p.m. we have Goolsby, and that'll wrap us up for the news today. Let's take a look at some charts here. We'll begin. Here's our weekly chart. Not a ton to really see on the weekly, except just to say that we have broken out above the prior week's range. And so for me, this gives us the market condition of price discovery higher, where we are above the prior period and able to extend. So very bullish, as we've seen, and we have this very unauctioned area right here, which may be a factor when we get back down there. But as of right now, we're holding above the prior week's range, so that's what's important on this chart. Let's take a look at our daily chart. And again, on the daily chart, we're just sort of reiterating what's happened, our break from the prior week's range, our break from the prior week's range. Let's throw those master levels up on here. Using IRT today, a different platform, which is one that I'm a bit more familiar with. So hopefully it's helpful. But on our daily, as you can see, yesterday we broke out higher, and we're holding near around yesterday's VPOC, put in a new all-time high. We have 5 sets of singles left from the prior auction here, which may be a factor if we start to retrace. But the key here is, as of today, if we hold the prior day's low, we have commenced one time framing up on the full session. These are full session bars. So very bullish on both daily and weekly time frames. Let's take a look at a structure chart if we can. And here, once again, we're just seeing the break from the prior week's high. And our area of former balance. So what we're just seeing here, there's not a ton to say because this is just price discovery higher. We continually just push higher, balance, pull back, and continue. That's what we're seeing. What we continue to see, just sellers are not seeing these prices as cheap enough to aggressively sell. And we have to remember too, is any pullbacks that we get are going to be a first pullback from a new high. So you generally, for me at least, I'm a little less aggressive to see a lot of extension on the short side. Like shorts are a little bit lighter and tighter for me until we really show the ability to pull back, fail to get the prior high, and then start taking out the prior low, which is what I always talk about. So as of right now, very bullish, very bullish environment on the higher time frames. But if we take a look at our trigger chart, which we'll do next here, we're starting to see a little bit of retracement where we have basically yesterday's VPOC and the overnight low in these singles area, and we're just kind of boxed in this area. So with that, let's go over a few plans for what may happen today. Now, seeing these two things, sort of what's happening here, let me get a better view of the chart. Okay, so the two things that I'm looking at here coming into today in the S&P is two plan. This is what I'm looking at. Here is our overnight VPOC, or our yesterday's VPOC, and here is our overnight low. Then we have yesterday's high, which is also our all-time high, and then the next area up that I'm aware of, and again, beyond the all-time high, it's really hard to handicap. I really don't like to. I just go by options. Option strikes. So we have the 75 and we have the 00 up here, 5600. And then below here, we have our next set of singles down to yesterday's midline, which is a stock zone. And below that, we have our prior week's high. And below that, our prior week's settle and VPOC are both in this area. And then below, we have our two vola down area and our key support. So these are basically the key areas that I'm looking at today. And what could happen? Well, in a very basic sense, what I'm looking at is, like I said, we have yesterday's VPOC and we have this overnight low. And what I'm expecting to see in one way or another is a potential push higher that like one of these two areas is going to be tested. So let's go over what is happening as of right now. Right now, we've hit resistance and we're retracing. So if that theme continues, I would expect tests towards the prior VPOC to find resistance and to continue lower to take this overnight low and just give us more of the auction lower that we've kind of expected. So this sort of action is what we're seeing, where we've hit resistance, pushed lower. There's a bid here, and if the sellers remain, if the resistance up here remains stronger, I would expect us to kind of auction lower until we hit wherever the buyers are. Where were the buyers last time? The buyers were in this area, in my opinion. This is where the buyers were. This is where we pushed higher, retraced, continued, and then just expanded. So I'm looking at basically this area is where the buyers are. So if we continue unabated, I would look for us to just quietly auction like this, as long as we are not hitting the prior highs. If at any time here we see some type of a test lower, I would expect support ahead of the prior week's low if we get here. Any type of a test lower that then can expand range back above the prior area of high, the prior high, pull back and hold above this prior low, then I would expect the environment to change and for us to either move into balance or potentially start to move higher. So auctioning lower, as long as we're not getting the prior high, I would expect this kind of action. I would expect support ahead of the prior week's high and for us to push higher. And in which case, if we get back above this 32 area, which is an area that I'm paying attention to, is yesterday's midline. If we get a back above this, then I would be looking for longs back up towards the prior VPOC, which would be the target if we start moving up this way again. So as of right now, this is what I'm expecting. We're seeing an auction lower. So I'd expect that to continue until we see action like this, which would be a larger swing higher that holds above the prior low and continuation. With this auction, if we get action like this and then get a setup higher, my target would be the prior day's VPOC. if we get a move higher initially, let's go over what a move higher initially would be. It could be if we hold this overnight low or get a very quick test and rejection higher, either one of those count. And then the area that I would be looking for, as I've said, above yesterday's VPOC is the key area. If we get some type of test below the prior days or the overnight low and then revert above, or we just hold the overnight low and push higher to the prior VPOC, and we're able to accept that price, maybe hold on a pullback, I would be looking for extension higher to take yesterday's high and the former all-time high. If we take take yesterday's high and the all-time high, then my default expectation on prices at the all-time high is a grind higher until somebody decides to sell. I wouldn't expect we don't know what's up there. We don't know who's selling. We've never traded these prices before. So once we hit an all-time high, I'm just expecting a grind up to the next landmark. For me, I look at option strike prices. So I would look for this kind of grind if we test and reject the overnight low, or if we just don't even test it at all. It might just be a quick repricing. We've seen a lot of these up to yesterday's high, holds the prior VPOC, and then we just commence this grind. That is what I would look for. And of course, as I always say, we're always vulnerable to an impulse lower that cannot get the prior high, tries, can't, takes out the low, that action. But however, in a very basic sense, that's really what I'm keying off of today. We have yesterday's VPOC, we have the overnight low. These areas are where I'm expecting to tell me where the trade wants to go. If we continue lower, i.e. we fail to recover the prior day's VPOC, we take the overnight low, then I'm looking for, as I've said, this 30s area, which is the prior day's VPOC or the prior day's midline, and this 32 zone. That's the first landmark. If we still cannot get back above, then I'm looking for potentially the prior week's high, where I would initially expect support to come in ahead of the prior week's high for a potential return higher. Returning higher, I would be targeting zones on the way up, but my key target would be the prior day's VPOC. As well, just covering a few other ideas, it is possible for us to test below the prior week's high, in which case if we get down, we start trading these areas, the prior week's high is going to be important. Test below, we could attempt to go and then get above for the long, or we could extend the whole way to the prior day's VPOC and see the return from there. But overall, my initial expectation on test lower is bullishness. How could that be wrong? That could be wrong with, like I said, any type of a test lower could come from here, but on any test lower that then are unable to get the prior high, I would consider that to be continuing lower. If we see it around the prior week's high, then the key would be the test below that attempts to get above and cannot, in which case I would target Century and the prior week's settle and VPOC area. That would be the continuation, or of course the other way it could go is the push higher that holds and recovers back up into these areas. But that's basically what I'm looking at today in the S&Ps. Really, like I said, I will be keying off of how do we treat initial tests of the prior VPOC, how do we treat initial tests of the overnight low, and I'm looking for that to tell me, do we push up and accept these prices and start to continue, or do we push up, fail, take the overnight low? Likewise, on the bottom, I'm looking for the same, or on the low, I'm looking for the same thing. Do we respect the overnight low? Do we test, reject? Or do we just, as I've said, show that we're unable to go higher, start going lower, and just are unable to take the prior highs? But those are the areas I'm looking at. I will be keying off of the overnight low and the prior VPOC. If we get above the prior VPOC, I'm looking at yesterday's high. If we get above yesterday's high, I'm open to the 75s. If we get below the overnight low and we hold, I'm looking for 30s, yesterday's mid. Below that, I'm looking for the prior week's high. If we get below the prior week's high and we can't recover, I'm looking at the magnet zone, this century region. Noting, of course, I am open to support because we're in a bull market. I'm open to support at any one of these areas, and I am not super optimistic about a runner on the short side. I'm also not super optimistic about a runner on the long side either, just because range can tend to be very compressed, when we're pushing up these prices. But this is what I'm looking at today. Important prices for me: overnight low, prior VPOC, and how we treat tests into this area and tests into that area, and we know our target areas below, and we know our target areas above. Fairly straightforward day. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy to trade. In fact, it usually means it's going to be more difficult to trade. But that's just kind of how it goes. That's what I got for you today. A few bumps with today's show. Just I had to use different software, but hopefully it works out in the end for you guys. And the message today, at least for me, this is how I'm going into today, is pretty clear. These are the areas I'm looking at. We're in a bull market. We're seeing price continually want to trade higher. That's what we're walking into. Do we see it? Does it continue today? If so, we know how to trade it. If we start to see reversion, then we'll be looking for lower prices. So that's what we're looking at today. I hope this was helpful to you. I hope you're having a great morning. I hope that can continue. I hope you do something today that will help improve your trading and your journey. And of course, most of all, I hope you can make someone else smile, because that's really the most important thing you can do on any day.